In 1241, something truly terrible happened. An entire European kingdom vanished in just a few weeks. It wasn't wiped out by disuse or internal conflict. The Mongol Empire, which is hands down the most powerful military force on the planet back then. About a third of Hungary's people died. Thousands of towns and villages were burned down. The king had to run from city to city, practically begging for help. A German monk at the time wrote that after being around for 350 years, the kingdom of Hungary was completely destroyed. But here's the crazy part: 44 years later, the Mongols came back, using the same strategies, the same army, and just as determined to take over. They got totally crushed. They couldn't even take one city that had walls. They lost a ton of soldiers, and they had to leave feeling embarrassed. So, what changed in those 44 years? What was the secret thing that turned a kingdom that was in ruins into a place that was impossible to invade? Before I tell you, let me ask you something. Where are you watching us from? Also, what chain is it where you are right now? I'm really wondering about everyone who's watching. And here's the question to keep in mind. Was this secret what was Mi's new invention? Was it something deeper about how people bounce back and change? To know the secret, we have to understand how bad things were in the first place. In March of 1241, 5 Mongol armies invaded Hungary all at the same time from 5 different directions. This wasn't just a surprise attack, it was a plan made by Subutai, who some say was the smartest military leader the Mongols ever had. Subutai had sent spies to Poland, Austria, and Wayne, Hungary. He knew the land really well. He knew what they were bad at. Most importantly, he knew that Hungary had problems inside the country. King Béla IV, who, smart and brave, had been trained to get more power for the king. He is taking back land as far again to the rich nobles. This made the nobles really angry. Some of them were secretly hoping the Mongols would beat the king. They thought it would only hurt some people, not everyone. They can't have been more wrong. But there is something even worse than the fighting among themselves. It was Hungary's way of defending itself. Back in 1241, the whole kingdom of Hungary, which is as big as Poland is now, had less than 10 stone castles. Just 10. And most of those were on the western side, near Austria, not on the east where the Mongols were attacking. Why was that? It wasn't because Hungary was poor or behind the times. It was because they had a rule by it. For hundreds of years, Hungarian kings had told the nobles they couldn't build their own stone castles. The reason for that was, they were worried that if the nobles had their own strong castles, they would start doing their own thing and not listen to the king. That could lead to more local power and fighting within the country. This rule had kept the king in charge when things were peaceful. But when the Mongols attacked, it was a disaster. Most Hungarian towns and farms were defended by wooden forts, dirt walls, and ditches filled with water. Those defenses might have worked against armies from the west. But the Mongols brought machines that could throw huge stones, things that would set fire, and ways to be cruel. They forced people they captured to fill the ditches with dirt and dead bodies, so their soldiers could get across. Someone who wrote about what happened at the time said that the Hungarians didn't have many cities with strong walls or castles. And their army? Hungary had maybe 60,000 to 100,000 soldiers. That sounds big, but most of them were light fighters on horses, like their ancestors, the Huns. They didn't have many knights in heavy armor. They didn't have many people who could use crossbows. They didn't know how to fight the way these guys from the plains did. The Mongols? They had about 80,000 soldiers. They're all trained fighters and learned since they were kids. They had bows that could shoot almost 1,000 feet. They pretend to run away to trick the enemy into chasing them into fights. And they had Subutai. On April 9th, 1241, the two armies met at the Sager River near a town called Mohi. The night before, the Hungarian army camped out on the banks of the river. They thought they were in a smart spot. They thought that by holding the bridge that was about 650 feet across the river, they could stop the Mongols. At midnight, some of the Mongol soldiers tried to cross the bridge. Prince Coleman and Archbishop Eugrinus, with the Knight Templar, fought back right away, and they won. The Hungarian crossbowmen, even though there weren't many of them, caused a lot of problems on the bridge. Someone who wrote about it at the time said that almost all of the first group of Mongols were killed. The Hungarians charged them and cut down a lot of them, pushing rest across the bridge and causing them to drown. The Hungarian soldiers went back to their camp and celebrated. They thought the fight was over. They didn't know that Subutai was watching and had just figured out something important. Hungarian crossbows were dangerous. The dangerous were the Mongols were weak. So, Subutai changed his plan. Old Bataclan kept attacking the bridge with machines that threw stones to keep the Hungarians busy. Subutai quietly took a lot of soldiers south and built a bridge across the river. At the same time, Ada's brother, Shirban, took soldiers north to find a shallow place to cross. When Mohin came to the land, the Hungarians realized it was on three sides. They tried to fight back. It was too late. The Mongols used weapons that used gunpowder, which was new at the time and came from China, to make the Hungarian soldiers panic. The horses got scared. Soldiers were stepping all over each other. One of the Hungarian nobles said later that more people died from being trampled than from arrows. Then Subutai did something really smart. He left a space open in the circle. The Hungarians saw a way out and ran for it. But that was the trap. Once they were out of the camp and spread out, the Mongol soldiers on horses chased them down in small groups. The Hungarian crossbowmen fought greatly again. People at the time wrote that they hurt the Mongols. King Béla IV was able to get away because his bodyguards defended him. Nobles, farmers, and religious leaders all died together. Over the next year, the Mongols destroyed Hungary. They burned most of the towns in the plains. They made the people slaves. It afforded the wire systems for farming, which caused a famine in 1242 and 1243. Hungary stopped being a country that could take care of itself. Then, in March of 1242, the Mongols left. The reason they gave was that the great Khan Agidie had died in December of 1241, and the princess had to go back to Mongolia to pick a new Khan. But some people who study history now say that doesn't make sense. News of the death couldn't have gotten to Bataclan at fast. Plus, Bata didn't even go back to Mongolia for the election. So, what really happened? Some people think Amana soldiers were more tired and Ilan. Even if they won at Mohi, they were still facing people who wouldn't give up. A city of Esztergom, which was Hungary's capital, had a small stone fort in a mill. Bataclan shot with his machines, but the wasp didn't fold on. He sent soldiers to attack it, but the crossbowmen in the fort, led by a knight from Aragon named Simon, fought them off again and again. Some unnamed juries read about how the crossbowmen really good hurting Mongols. Also, the forts at Székesfehérvár, Panhelma, and Klis, which were all made of stone, stood strong. At Klis, the people were defending and rolled rocks down a hill onto a Mongol soldier when they tried to climb out after their machines didn't work. Recent studies have found something even more amazing. People living in the towns had dug ditches around stone churches on hills and fought from there. They found a lot of weapons and bones with injuries from battle. Regular people were fighting back everywhere, which slowed down the Mongols. One person in studies has found out that the Hungarians fighting Mongols was way more important than what people at Heim wrote about. Maybe Bataclan left not just because of politics, but because he realized that Hungary could be destroyed, but it couldn't be completely taken over without losing too many soldiers. In May 1242, King Béla IV came back to a country that was in ruins. This was a really important time in history. A king who wasn't strong might have given up. A regular king might have just tried to rebuild what was lost. But Béla didn't do that. He looked at the ruins and asked himself why some places were still standing. The answer was clear. Stone castles, crossbowmen, heavy armor. From that, he made the biggest decision of his life, something that went against what Hungary always done. In 1247, Béla wrote to Pope Innocent IV. He said that he was planning to put stone fortresses along the Danube River where they had fought. But that was just the start. Béla did something that had never been done before. He stopped being the only one who could build castles. He let the nobles, religious leaders, and even towns build their own fortresses. But with one condition, they had to be ready to fight for the king when he needed them. This was a big rust. Remember, the reason they didn't let people build castles before was to keep the nobles from getting too powerful. Now, Béla was changing that. Why? Because he knew it was better to have a strong country with powerful nobles than to be a weak king ruling over nothing. He trusted that the Mongols were sent to bid for it that would bring Hungary together. And he was right. What happened was amazing. In the first 10 years, 44 new stone castles were built. By the time Béla died, that number was almost 100. Studies now say that 147 to 172 fortresses were built between 1242 and 1300. Hungary went from being a country with 10 stone castles to a huge fortress with hundreds of stone defensive points. But Béla didn't just build stone walls. He trained the whole army. In 1248, he made a rule that people who were ant nobles could serve the nobles and get land if they fought in the king's army with armor. This was a huge change. Instead of just having light fighters on horses, Hungary now needed knights in heavy armor like the ones in the west. In 1247, he made a deal with the Knights of St. John, giving them the land on the southeastern border in exchange for them trained soldiers in armor and building fortresses. And most importantly, in 1259, Béla asked the Pope to help him get at least 1,000 professional crossbowmen from Venice. Why were crossbowmen so important? Crossbows had 3 big things that made them good against the Mongols. First, it could shoot farther than Mongol bows, especially in the heavy European crossbows that could shoot over 1,100 feet. Second, they could go through armor better. A crossbow bolt could go through the Mongol leather and wooden armor from far away. Third, people didn't need to train for years to use crossbows like they did with bows. A farmer could learn how to shoot a crossbow in a few weeks. That was important for building an army quickly. But the best thing about crossbows wasn't on the battlefield, but in defending castles. Béla knew that Hungary couldn't beat the Mongols in a fight in the Alpine plains. But from behind the thick stone walls with small openings to shoot through, crossbowmen could shoot out while being completely safe. The Mongols, who were good at fighting in horses, wouldn't be able to do anything against this kind of defense. Béla also changed the cities. In 1248, he moved the people passed from the plains to a hill across the Danube River, where they built a new city called Budau. Within 20 years, Budau was the most important place for business in Hungary. He let over 20 cities govern themselves, encouraging them to build stone walls and create their own defenses. But maybe their biggest change wasn't military, but in people's minds. Béla let thousands of people from Germany, Poland, and Italy moved to Hungary to fill the land that had been destroyed. He told them that they could become nobles if they fired horses with armor when the king needed them. This was a new agreement. The government would give land, protection, and status, and the people would be loyal and fight for a common goal, to never let what happened in 1241 happen again. Béla became known as Hungary's second founder. Not because he built the country from nothing, but because he rebuilt it from the ruins with a new idea. But would all of these changes actually work? The answer would come in the winter of 1285. Throughout the 1250s and 1260s, the leaders of the Golden Horde kept sending demands to Hungary. In 1254, Vatican wanted to marry someone into the royal family and have a fourth of Hungary's army to help him take over Europe. Béla said no. In 1259, Berkhan asked the same thing: give up, give his soldiers, get a fifth of the things we steal, and don't pay taxes. Béla said no again. In 1264, they made another demand. Béla still said no. In letters to the Pope, Béla wrote that the Mongols had been known to be untrustworthy for years, and any agreement with them isn't worth anything. He knew they would be back. The question wasn't if, but when. In December of 1285, it happened. Nogai Khan Talbiga, two powerful leaders of the Golden Horde, led an invasion of Hungary. They went the same way they had in 1241. Talbiga went for the Vrek Pass from the north. Nogai went through Transylvania from the south. They thought it would be easy. They remembered how weak Hungary was in 1241. They thought at 44 years wasn't enough time to change a country. They were wrong. Talbiga's soldiers went into northern Hungary using the same old strategies: speed, surprise, and dividing the enemy. But this time, they saw something they had never seen before: stone castles everywhere, on every hill, at every river, and at every place where roads met. Talbiga tried to attack Riga Castle in the Zemplin region, but he couldn't. He tried to surround it, but his soldiers would always gain shot at by crossbowmen from the walls. The small openings in the walls were made so that crossbowmen could shoot out while being almost impossible to hit. He tried to use machines to break the walls. But unlike the wooden and dirt walls from 1241, these thick stone walls didn't fall down. Some wrote at the time that Talbiga had a lot of problems with the number of fortresses and getting to any castle with their cities. While Talbiga was stuck in the north, Nogai had more luck in Transylvania at first. He stole from the cities of Regain, Brasov, and Bystritza, which weren't fully defended yet. But then he also ran into the castle system. At Brain Castle, the Sikeli defenders fought off many attacks. And there's an even bigger change from 1241. This time, the Hungarians weren't just defending. They were fighting back. Soldiers led by Roland Barsha, Amadeus Abi, George Baksa, and Peter of Sarras, who had all been trained and promoted after the changes, were always ambushing and attacking the Mongol soldiers. These were Entha-like fighters on horses from 1241. They were knights in heavy armor like the ones in West, fighting from safe castle bases. Hungary's new plans to use castles as strand points, use crossbowmen to hurt the enemy from far away, and use knights in heavy armor to fight back when the Mongols retired. For the Mongols, who were good at fighting on open plains, this was a nightmare. They couldn't trick the enemy into fighting in the open. They couldn't take the castles. Every day, they were losing more soldiers to ambushes, disease, and not having enough supplies. Finally, King Ladislaus IV gathered the main army on the western side of the Danube, a big, well-equipped, and confident force. Talbiga saw it and decided to leave. Leaving through the Carpathian Mountains in the winter with people attacking him was a disaster. Sikeli ambushed Talbiga's soldiers on their way back. Heavy snow blocked the way. The army fell apart. Nogai in the south also lost a lot of soldiers. People wrote that he was able to steal some things, but he lost thousands of soldiers. After 2 months, the Mongols left Hungary completely. They hadn't taken one city with walls. They hadn't caught the king. They came by Ivlo to Shother and had lost a lot of soldiers. One person who studied Hester wrote that the result was very different from what happened in 1241. In 1241, Hungary was destroyed in a few weeks. In 1285, the Mongols were pushed back in a few months. What made the difference? Now, we get back to the first question: what was Hungary's secret weapon? If you're thinking it was an amazing invention, some new weapon, or some special way of fighting that no one else knew about, you'll be disappointed. Because the secret weapon wasn't one thing. It was a system. One part of the system is stone castles, which can from 10 to 140 about 40 years. Not just big fortresses, but also small stone towers on hills, town walls, and monasteries that were defended. It was a strong defensive network that made it impossible for invaders to move around easily. Each castle was a message: you can destroy towns, and you can't take its land. Another part of the system was crossbowmen. It wasn't that crossbows are better than Mongol bows in every way. When defending castles, crossbows let people, even people who were trained, do damage behind safe walls. In 1241, Hungary only had a few crossbowmen. In 1284, most of the castles on board professional crossbowmen. A third part of the system was knights in heavy armor. These knights weren't supposed to beat the Mongol fighters on horses in the open. That was still hard to do. They were the ones who fought back when the Mongols got closer when they were attacking castles and got tired. In 1241, only the Knights Templar and Huguenots from other countries wore full armor. In 1285, Hungary had dozens of knights like that, trained and paid for by the new system that Béla created. A fourth part of the system, and maybe the most important part, was the plan. Béla knew that Hungary can beat the Mongols in a long war in the plains. So, he didn't try. Instead, he created a defense plan different layers. One layer is castles and sea walls to slow down the enemy and do damage. Another layer was Karsten and the walls to weaken the invaders. A third layer was knights in armor to fight back from safe bases. A fourth layer was people in the town to ambush and attack the enemy as they left. This is a plan to fight back, not just to resist. It was about making the invasion too expensive for the Mongols to continue. In 1241, a Marmars destroyed Hungary without losing too much. In 1285, a cost was too high. But there was one more part of the system that was less clear but maybe the most important: the will of the people. Béla had turned what happened in 1241 into a national memory, something that motivated people. Everyone in Hungary knew that Mongols would be back. Every castle that was built, every knight that was trained, and every crossbowman that was hired was all for one reason: to never let 1241 happen again. That's why the nobles who were fighting in 1241 came together in 1285. That's why people who ran away in 1241 fought from castles in 1285. The Mongols weren't beaten by a weapon. They were beaten by how a country changed. The story Hungary isn't just history. It has important lessons for anyone, whether it's people or groups, who have failed and need to get back on their feet. One lesson is that failure can tell you something. A lot of people who fail blame others, make excuses, or pretend it didn't happen. Béla chose to do something different. He looked at the failure like a scientist. Why were some places still standing? Why are crossbowmen buried in the monasteries on horses? Why can't the Mongols take Estragon? He used what he learned from the disaster and turned it into a plan. In life, when you fail, in your job, in your business, or in your relationships, the question is, why am I so unlucky? What did this failure teach me? Another lesson is that changing the system takes courage. Ailsby's decision was at building casters, and letting go of the power to share it with the nobles. That went against everything a king would want to do. It was risky. Béla knew that in the new situation, with the Mongol threat, keeping the old system of being the only one who could build castles to lead to destruction. It was better to share power in a strong country than to be in charge of nothing. A lot of leaders today fail because they try to keep the old ways a new world. They're war-free, and they're a failure. Another lesson is that defending yourself doesn't mean doing nothing. Hungary in 1285 didn't just close the doors and wait. They built defensive systems but also fought back. In wait, defending yourself means protecting what you have, your health, your relationships, and your money. It also means looking for chances to fight back at the right time. Another lesson is that time is your friend if you use it. 44 years in 1241 to 1285 isn't a one-time in history, but Béla used every year carefully. In the first years, he built the most important castles. In the next years, he changed the army. In the following years, he hired crossbowmen and treated knights without stopping. A lot of people give up on big goals because they think 40 years is too long, but 40 years will pass anyway. The question is, when it passes, how many castles have you built? Another lesson is that preparing for the worst makes you mentally strong. Béla didn't trick himself into thinking that the Mongols wouldn't be back. He knew they would come. He told the people he was building everything based on the worst-case situation. When the Mongols did come, no one panicked. They were ready. In life, being too optimistic is dangerous. Being realistic, hoping for the best, again ready for the worst, makes you stronger. Another lesson is that the best thing you leave behind is a system, not just what you do yourself. Béla died in 1270, 15 years before the second invasion. He never saw a secret weapon put to the test. That the system he built kept working. The castles are still there. Knights were trained the way he wanted them to be. A defense plan is passed on. He had created something bigger than himself, something that lasted after he was gone. That's what makes someone a great leader, not what you do while you're in charge, but what keeps working after you're gone. So, we've gone from the ruins of 1241 to the victory of 1285. The question I asked at the beginning was Hungary as secret weapon and amazing? Crossbowmen and knights in armor were just signs of something bigger. Hungary had decided that it would never be an easy target again. In 1241, they were beaten because they weren't ready, they were fighting among themselves, and they were holding on to an old system. In 1285, they won because they had learned, come together, and changed. The Mongol Empire, the biggest empire of its time, wasn't stopped by miracle. They were stopped by people who had turned pain into lessons, lessons into action, and action into a system. After the defeat in 1285, the Golden Horde never attacked Hungary again. Not because they got weaker, but because it would cost them too much. Hungary had changed itself from an easy target to a target that wasn't worth the price. And that's maybe the last lesson for everyone: you don't have to be unbeatable. You just have to make beating you too expensive. Build your castles. Train your crossbowmen. Get your systems ready. And when the challenge comes, because it will come, you won't just survive, you'll win. If this story made you think differently about standing strong, please like and subscribe. I make history videos not just to tell stories, but to show way on today. And comment below, what castle are you building in your life right now? What system do you need to create to get ready for a challenge ahead? In the next video, I'll tell you about another leader who also turned failure into victory in a different way. Don't miss it. Thanks for watching until the end.